What's up guys, it's Johnny Candido of Candido Training HQ, and in today's video we're going to talk about a controversial subject, but it's one that I believe is still worth discussing. And that's the topic of CrossFit, and more specifically comments by Greg Glassman, the CEO. Wait a second, this was just supposed to be an intro. I'll see you guys later, peace. And anyways, as I was saying, the video is about a video on CrossFit's YouTube channel where Greg Glassman is interviewed. And they basically ask him, what would you do if you had an athlete who just had terrible squat form and they just don't know what to do with as far as his mechanics? What do you do to fix that? And his response was that technical knowledge amongst the coaches is not the answer in his opinion. That's not what we want to look into. Rather, what we want to look into is just having the workouts be, as he called, a celebration. Have it be like a birthday party, which was a bit strange to say, but his point was a valid one, is that basically that you want to focus on having fun working out rather than just worrying about the details all the time. I want to make actually a couple things clear before I really get into this. That first of all, this is an old video, so I'm not 100% sure he still believes this view. And it's very possible because people change their opinion over time, as they should, as they learn more and more about training in general. And I also want to make it clear that I'm not one of these people who spends their time hating on CrossFit, just trolling on the internet.
That's my job, HQ.
I think that there's a legitimate point being made, and that it brings up a big misconception that I see people have when it comes to having proper form, or at least pursuing proper technique. And that is this thought that we equate the idea of being a form Nazi, someone on the internet who just, will ridicule someone who deadlifts, over 900 pounds, will ridicule their form because their upper back rounds slightly. That's what I call a form Nazi, someone who doesn't understand the details and expects exact perfect form across the board for everybody. Now, there's misconception where people assume that these form Nazis are the same thing as actual knowledgeable coaches who understand mechanics, when in reality the two are usually on the extreme ends of the spectrum. They're not at all the same, because someone who expects the same mechanics out of every athlete just doesn't understand the factors that are going into technique. And this is why it's extremely important, in my opinion, for coaches to have technical knowledge. Because I'll give you an example. Let's say someone's back is rounding, their lower back is rounding in the deadlift. Now, let's say it's rounding in the setup. It's not even once they're pulling the weight, it's before they even pull the weight in the first place. Now, that's usually going to be a sign that they have limited hamstring mobility, and they need to work on that to improve their ability to get in the proper position so that they can properly flex their hips, and then they can extend the hips as they extend their knees as well once they perform the deadlift. But then on the other end of the spectrum, let's talk about the back squat. Let's say there's an athlete who their lower back rounds when they're in the bottom position. Now, a coach who's not knowledgeable may just use the same thing. Just say, okay, work on your hamstring flexibility. That worked for the deadlift, so let's just do that for the back squat. But they might not understand the factors that go into this. They might not understand that the hamstrings are a biarticular muscle, meaning that they're connected at two joints, at the knee and at the hip, and they're responsible for knee flexion and hip extension. Meaning once you're getting into a back squat, you're flexing the hip and you're flexing at the knees though. So what happens is the length of the hamstrings doesn't actually change that much. So for most people at least, I'll say it's extremely unlikely that your hamstrings are maximally stretched in the bottom position of a back squat. What's usually the real problem is that your morphology, how you're built in terms of your hips specifically, how they're built limits the amount of anterior pelvic tilt you can have to match your back angle. So basically what happens is you have to limit your forward lean then, the degree of your forward lean. So for this type of person who has severe rounding, what they might have to do is switch from a low bar squat to a high bar squat. Or they might have to work on their ability to externally rotate and abduct their hips to get their knees out. And they might have to work on their dorsiflexion, their ability to get their knees forward, because doing both of those actions will result in, once again, a more upright torso. So the point here is that that's a huge difference. If we have a coach who doesn't understand these factors, who just says, just do some hamstring stretches after your back squat, And we have another coach who's actually teaching that athlete to then do overhead squats with a narrow grip, to then do wide stance squats to work on their ability to get their knees out. You're going to have two extremely different results. And more importantly, when it comes down to what we're talking about, which is making training fun, which is what Greg Glassman was alluding to, that is what's going to happen, is that if you know what you're talking about, then the athlete will have more fun because now they can tackle the issue straight on, rather than having to always deal with feeling insecure about their technique and feeling helpless. Because if they're just making the same mistake over and over again, I can't think of anything that would basically make training less fun than that. And another point to this about technique being specific both to movements but also to individuals. So that's what I was talking about with how form Nazis just apply the same thing across the board. Well, what you'll see is a lot of times some people just are not built to deadlift, for example, conventional, with the neutral lumbar spine. It is just extremely difficult given their leverages. So now for that type of person, what you could either advise them to do is sometimes round their upper back actually does help them get into the proper position. But what I usually will recommend is just to switch to sumo deadlifts and just drop conventional completely. And this is something where you have to understand the factors involved. If someone's just training for general strength, they don't have to conventional deadlift. And once again, what happens once you make these types of decisions is the person now feels empowered because now they know what they need to do, and now they're not just making the same mistake. And people understand that they're making mistakes most of the time. They know their back's rounding. They know they have bad form because they'll videotape it, their friends will see it, and they just don't know what to do. At least that's from my experience, is that most people just want guidance, and that's why technical knowledge amongst coaches or experts is just extremely important. In my opinion, a lot of experts try to overcomplicate things almost intentionally to try to impress you with their knowledge. They use as many syllables as possible to communicate a message that's relatively simple. Now, I'm not saying that it's bad to use technical terms, or let's say use anatomical terms, to be as precise as possible. That's fine, and to explain the reasoning behind it, but I think that we need to at least have a simplified version as well. So if you're going to say something, about like externally rotating and abducting the hips, also just tell them, get your knees out. Say both of those things, or you can just say get your knees out in certain settings. Some athletes are not going to need all of the details for every piece of advice. And what you'll see is when it comes to corrective exercises as well, you need to make it clear exactly what you want them to do. Don't just say work on hamstring mobility, or don't just say work on external rotation of the hips, and without giving them just an actual drill to do. I've seen this a lot as well. Now the last point is optimizing performance. My brother competed, and I had a video on my channel a while back where he set a deadlift PR. And in that, I showed his attempt right before it with the exact same weight. He missed his attempt. Now, what actually happened is I recorded this, and I saw his hand position was an inch or two from the start of the knurling. So I told my brother in between reps to move his grip in. And I knew that this would have to make his stance a little bit narrower, so there is a give and take here, but that allows for a more efficient pull. And I know, given my brother's structure, that this would likely be beneficial because he has very long arms. And he's not really that big of a squatter relative to his deadlift. So usually you'll see guys who pull significantly more, they tend to usually pull with a little bit of a narrower stance, at least from what I've seen. So that one little change may have been the make or break factor when it came to actually setting that PR that he did right on the next attempt. So the little details like that can have a really big impact in these competitions. So that's just my opinion on it. I think that it's extremely dangerous to have this idea of downplaying technique, and it's just a bad message overall. But anyways, as I said, I think there is a legitimate point being made to not be a form Nazi, not discourage people, because we do need to encourage people, but also give them advice, also give them direction, so that they can then put their energy to improving themselves and feel confident in what they're doing. Alright, that's it guys. Make sure to like the video, support the channel, subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for watching guys. Peace!